Great. All right. Good morning again. I've been up here a couple times. I'm thrilled to have our panelists with us today and excited at this conversation regarding how AI is impacting data centers. Obviously, a lot of conversation this morning around data centers, the complexity, the challenges that they're facing, and inherently it impacts all our customers and partners as well. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and kick it off with introductions. Don, I know you were on this morning, so if it's all right, I might go to Marcus Anderson from Digital Realty, and if you can just share a little bit about yourself, your company, and then we'll go to Alex.
Sure. So Marcus Anderson, Head of Product Strategy and Programs at Digital Realty. Digital Realty is the largest data center colo operator in the world. We have over 50 metros, 300 data centers, and we talked about, right, Don, 100 megawatts is about $1 billion. We have 2,700 megawatts in operation with another 3 gigawatts or 3,000 megawatts coming into operation in the next couple of years. So a growing business. I also recently read we're the 7th largest publicly traded REIT. So another interesting stat about us.
Great, great. Alex?
Hello, everyone. Alex Lee, Senior Director, Hyperscale AI and Data Centers for Frontier Communications. First of all, I love sitting down because it's like the great equalizer when it comes to my height. So that's awesome. But one of my primary responsibilities is finding ways to monetize our 3,200 central offices across 25 states. Yesterday, Bruce, the CEO of Ribbon, talked a lot about downsizing telco gear, migrating telco gear outside of central offices to save money, which is great. But what that also gives me and provides me is an opportunity to monetize that space and power that's now sitting there. Those central offices are not going anywhere. My gear's there, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Crown Castle, their gear's there. And what's unique about those assets is it's on the edge. It's literally at the edge of our 3 million plus broadband customers. How can I evangelize those assets to hyperscale companies, AI companies, for their applications to be in those data centers? And it's not going to be like these big boys here with megawatts. I'm talking about 5 to 10 racks, low power. What equipment could they put there that can maximize customer experience at the broadband level?
Yep, Josh.
Yep. Thanks, Jenny. Josh Leonard with Burns & McDonnell. Burns & McDonnell, if you don't know who we are, we're a private engineering and construction firm that we're pretty dominant in the power and T&D space, but also in the broadband space. We serve data centers, most of the hyperscalers, and we have a unique perspective of this catalyst in terms of how it impacts the utility sector. It's not just a communications problem that we need to solve, and technology is going to play a big part of it, but there's also a very large infrastructure investment. I think you alluded to it this morning, but from a utilities perspective, this isn't a plan for it and implement it within 3 years. That would be a good case. These are infrastructure investments that require permitting, they require coordination, they require very special planning that goes in mind, they require T&D investments in terms of transmission and substations. It's a big commitment on the part of utilities, and the more that it goes to the edge, the more disruptive it is. And so that's something we need to all pay attention to and figure out that problem. And it's going to be a problem that takes us decades to figure out.
Yeah, great, great. Well, we have a lot of great questions here, but I do want to share towards the end, we are going to open up questions to the audience. So I want you to start thinking about questions, and we'll jump around with a mic and give everyone here, not everyone, at least a few folks, the opportunity to ask our panelists questions, but I'll let you kick it off.
Great. First off, we're honored to have all 4 of you as the rest of our guest speakers. Thank you for attending and also participating and entertaining our questions. Don, great presentation today. These topics around AI and data centers aren't just for this group in telecom, it's for everybody. The things that you guys are speaking to resonate with everyone, and I'm sure they very much appreciate all the insights you guys are providing. You mentioned 100 megawatt data center, and first you said $1 billion, and then it became $4 to $5 billion once you add the tenants in, which is amazing. But, I think as we think about the demands of the power consumption, sustainability, going green, that just got flipped on itself, in the last 3 years. How do you handle something like that in terms of, I know it's certainly very important to you and your company.
Yeah, so I'll certainly start. From sustainability there, as I touched on a little bit this morning, there's this very well-organized structure, and it's applicable globally, right? So it's, as much as we're talking here about North America, this is the same on a global basis. But they think of it in 3 buckets. One is what you consume yourself. So any energy you generate, you have to then figure out how do you offset the appropriate amount of carbon, right? So everybody, I think, has heard about carbon offsets. Some of that's in the form of, not so much anymore, but in the early days, planting trees and kind of offsetting. But more and more now, what you're seeing is purchasing power that is generated from windmills or solar and putting that on the grid. So you may not exactly be consuming it, but you're contributing it to the grid to offset the power used. The second bucket is what you buy. So if one of our vendors, sometimes there's an accountability as a vendor to offset that and deliver carbon-free as well. The third bucket, which is the hardest, and it goes deeper into your organization. It could be your employees and the carbon they generate going to and from work. It could be the steel you use in your construction project. How do you offset the carbon associated with forming that steel? And then things like concrete. So scope 1 and 2, as they're called, there's a lot of activity there, but I think right now there's a lot around putting renewable sources onto the grid. The other thing that's going to slowly come along is natural gas will slowly but surely be replaced with hydrogen. So a lot of these gas plants that run today on natural gas, they can accommodate some degree of contribution from hydrogen. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot of commitment, candidly, even from the hyperscalers, and the cloud and the media companies. So it's something that's very, very important.
Excellent.
And to extend that question to the rest of the panel.
One of the interesting things that we've found as, we've talked about the scale of AI demand for our services. We can leverage, we may talk about this later on, but we can certainly leverage tools from AI to generate greater water efficiency, energy efficiency, and also people hours efficiency, leveraging those tools as well. So sustainability is a massive undertaking and objective. We found quite a bit of success in sort of, raising capital to build our business tied to green initiatives, renewable energy, those types of things. And then we're also leveraging these AI tools and AI technologies to drive, 18 gigawatt hours of energy efficiency into our business. These are just some of the initial metrics that we're driving, leveraging the power of AI. So I see these things as potentially being on their face diverging, but they're actually can be quite complementary.
Yep. Frontier, I don't know.
When I started my career in the data center industry 25 plus years ago, we had like one data center. And it just really comes down to volume. We're talking about 80 data centers, like 100 some data, and not just in the U.S. but globally. Mm-hmm. So how I see AI really helping companies like Edge Connect and DRT out as well as us is collecting all that data, right? But also being able to sort it. And what I mean that, let's use a very specific example: maintenance. Preventative maintenance, proactive maintenance, grooming, things of that nature. To be able to have all that data and be able to sort it in a quick and concise manner to make sure that maintenance is done on time. When you've groomed something, have you informed the customer? Have you moved it back? It could get really granular and also affect us, all of us here, very specifically. And to be able to provide that information quickly is, it just really benefits the end user as a whole.
I'm going to bring it back to Don, your point that you shared, and I think it's a unique insight, but I won't share the name, but I'll share the use case because I think that's what's important. But when you think about 100 megawatts or 150 megawatts, I was meeting with a client in a data center location that's being actively built, we'll just say it that way, where once you go beyond the investor-owned utility regulated monopoly market, let's just call it what it is, and you venture into the cooperative, where you don't have as much density, you don't have as much diversity of business, although it's developing out. What happens when 4 hyperscalers want to come in to that area at 150 as the smallest power requirement they're looking for? This represents an unsustainable risk when we talk about sustainability, a risk transfer where we haven't fully thought through what's the correct business model and sustainable way to do this that involves alternative power sources that might not be located close to there. And there aren't a lot of market participants who are capable of solving that problem in a way that meets those risk requirements and provides that sustainability mechanism. So there are a lot of cooperatives who are very concerned about how do we meet a power demand that is an order of magnitude different than what we've experienced in the past, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize our commitment to our communities and our members and have them subsidizing a risk? And what happens if that doesn't continue? If just one of those goes away, that represents a risk to that community that they've never been able to pay for. So we need to think about those types of challenges in terms of how do we go to the edge as well. That I think this is a very unique catalyst that we need to rethink the entire value equation and how we do it.
And that is a great point, because in our audience today, we do have a lot of our rural customers here, right? So they are in that community that you're talking about right now. So a lot of questions there.
Marcus, so reading about the difference between, certainly there's AI training, LLMs, but I've been reading about how you all see more of a focus on the inference, the practical use and putting it to use. If you could share some insights on that.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we've learned a little bit about AI training, including how to use some of these tools today. And 170 miles west of here in Abilene, Texas, there's a new data center going in, a joint venture project with OpenAI. And what that's doing is, it's building these language models, right? These language models that we will be using. The point of these language models is to utilize those. And eventually what we see, I think Don and I are aligned on this one, is that those inference use cases supported by those training models are going to come back to population centers and require low latency connectivity and low latency interactions. And so when I think about AI training that's being built today, you can probably cover the nation with a data center in Abilene, Texas, depending on the specific use case. But eventually what's going on with these workloads, Don, I think I heard you say 12 months, right, is there will be a pickup in the application of AI more for inference, the predictive analytics, the notifications, and the uses of these large language models are shifting. And one of the things that I think that has implications for is I'd like to think about this in terms of how is this like the cloud, in terms of how the cloud emerged, and how is this unlike the cloud? Mm-hmm. And in some cases, I think this is very much like the cloud because these connections between data networks require increasing need for interconnection. Also, we're seeing the demand for large suburban, scaled out, contiguous capacity blocks and rack density requirements that in some cases are like the cloud, in some cases even heavier than the cloud. But with training, there's going to be some differences than how cloud, with AI, there's going to be some differences than how cloud rolled out. And one of those for us that we're seeing is, it used to be that cloud latency requirements permitted network nodes to be in carrier hotels within the same metro area. I think with AI, what we're seeing is those network nodes may need to be on the same campus, even in the same building, as some of these inference and training models.
I don't know if you guys have further comments.
Yeah, as far as as far as training is concerned, that's definitely going to be something that's going to be in your larger data centers. What we at Frontier see is from the inference side, not all of it, but maybe pieces of it, because it is latency sensitive, because of the interaction that you may want with end users, that being on the edge at a central office, which has traditionally only been open to carriers, and it's not just us. I encourage other carriers to open their central offices as well to hyperscale companies, to AI companies. And then you have to think to yourself, what's in it for you? I see a lot of hardware providers out there. I see a lot of service providers out there. It's really a new funnel for you to provide equipment and services to central offices that are, a lot of them are in very rural areas. And the volume of those central offices, we're talking about thousands of them just in my portfolio alone. How can you, as a company and as individuals, take advantage of that new funnel and that new pipeline? You're going to have traditional colo. You're going to have traditional cloud services. And then what's the edge play? What's the edge strategy? And how can you benefit from that?
Great. I'm sorry, do you? So I'll start off with Josh. So kind of tapping into the theme of power, right? We've heard a lot about it this morning. We're also reading a lot about alternative powered, right? Liquid cooling. I think most of us saw Microsoft not long ago tapped in, how can we reopen 3 Mile Island? We heard yesterday that in China, every month or every couple months, they're opening a new nuclear facility to facilitate power in China. Starting with you, Josh, what are your thoughts here on alternative power and the future?
Good, excellent question. We could probably spend more than the time we were allowed on that question. I think you can think about it from two perspectives. There's the supply of the power, and then how do you get it to where you need it to be? But then there's also the equation of how do you use that power? And so where hyperscalers have maybe dominated this AI discussion up to this point, and they come in with the baseline requirement of 150 megawatts, which, I wish we would have had a visual, maybe that's an opportunity later, but what does that mean to a rural population, right? Where these things are going to go in when we're talking about the edge. Are there industry participants who are going to solve that problem in a novel way where we bring that scale down in a modular technology? And I think that's going to emerge to then fill in that latency and fill in that fabric of how things are relayed so that we don't have such a heavy requirement up front. So things I think that you'll see in the future that might be a good topic of a different panel at a different time would be the innovative technologies with modular data players or data centers that are more like a storage container, very modernized, very efficient, and that can scale from as low as 1 or 2 megawatts and fill in the gap between 2 and 100, and then provide those services on a more diverse basis. And then I think you have power opportunities that are coming, but some of them may be far off in the future in terms of a true zero emission type situation. It is going to need to be a nuclear situation in order to solve for that. But I think it's a total portfolio approach that'll get us there.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Don, how about alternative power?
I touched on a little bit. We out of necessity, 5-6 years ago, had to do it ourselves in Dublin, Ireland, where the power company basically said, "Hey, we'll get it to you. We just need 6 months," and 6 months literally turned into 6 years. So, and again, if you keep up with it, Dublin's kind of one of those magical markets, if you will, where just because of the tax advantage and things like that they're just the data center community and the data center population is tremendous. So the problem persists, and it candidly got worse. So we just energized our first natural gas power plant. Sits right next to the 2 data centers we just built. So our next step with that is certainly to start to bring hydrogen and use hydrogen as a method to offset and get back to that sustainability and the renewable. But there's no easy solution in the interim, right? I just think that the last power plants that came online for us, the nuclear power plants in this country, were down in Georgia. It way over schedule and way over budget, so we seem to have lost that muscle memory. So hopefully we're going to get it back. I think this 3 Mile Island project is interesting to see if they can, take it from a cold start and bring it back online. But it's going to be a multi-pronged approach to solve the problem.
And not really a surprising insight, but this is creating friction between communities, right? And data center providers, as well as ultimately the end users that are driving these applications. There's a facility, a supercomputer you may have heard about. XAI built it in Memphis, the Memphis area, in 122 days, 100,000 GPUs from NVIDIA. And there's something like 17.5 megawatts of natural gas supplied to that use case, but I think it's the Tennessee Valley Authority. I think you might be more familiar with. But there's relations that you have to, with neighbors and other businesses and communities, that you have to take into account as you build out data centers in this day and age with these types of constraints, and they're very real. I think for Digital Realty, that Northern Virginia Ashburn market that was mentioned is one of our home markets in the world, and I think it's well documented with Dominion Power and Dominion Energy in that market, just the challenges for transmission and what's coming online 2025, 2026, and we just need to be, advocating for communities. As well as the emergence of new power technologies coming to play, because some of these may be a few years out, as Don has mentioned.
Yeah.
Ashburn, that sounds pretty close to Don's house, so let's make sure he has power to his house.
Be good neighbors for Don.
Ironically, we don't have any data centers in Ashburn, so but Marcus is right. It continues to grow, and the thing now is, if you're building these data centers, right? The land in Ashburn, I've been there almost 20 years. I watched it go from $200,000 an acre to 5.5 million, almost $6 million an acre. They're larger plots, and then you're building, right? So now any delays associated with the power, you have a lot of money tied up, and significant, hundreds of millions of dollars, and so this problem gets real quick, and the power companies, and we even see some of the power companies with their hands out, right? I mean, these augmentations of transmission and generation. I mean, won't name names, but we had a site that we were pursuing, and the cooperative came in and said, "Great, I can get you 100 megawatts, but I need $550 million." So that's before you even start building a data center, right? So it's I don't blame them for asking, but something's got to give.
Absolutely. I don't know if you have. Do you have another question?
No, I think just kind of following Marcus' comment on the community, maybe if you have some thoughts around, it's not always about technology, obviously. We have communities, cities, states, governments that have to deal with the fact that, especially the big five coming in, they'll pay 3 times the price for energy than the communities, the businesses, so that has to be dealt with too. So it's not just about the nature of, well, we're not going to see a nuclear reactor in the next 7 years, so that won't solve it. And in that time period, we have other ways we're going to have to do this, but also you have the other ramification of what happens to the cost.
Yeah, I mean, power companies today are passing the costs on to the consumer, right? So that there's quite a bit of outrage happening there. Some of the power companies are rethinking that and saying, well, wait a minute, maybe it's the high volume users, right? So some of that's happening right now, and then combined with that is the take or pay nature of it, right? So again, all this investment going in the ground, if you don't utilize it to the levels you think or project, then you're going to pay. So it's a very real, expensive problem, and the communities are starting to wise up to it. I mean, all kidding aside, I do live in Ashburn, and I do watch the overreach right there. There's a by right ability to build a data center candidly anywhere you want. Now you have to start restricting the size of it So it's gone too far as a citizen, I would say.
It'll be interesting to see. And again, the rural communities, I think, will be in particular vulnerable, frankly, of, some of the, as we do these alternative powers, or is that where we put some nuclear facilities, right? I think it's easier to go there than the city.
Well, there's other things we can do that I think are shorter term fixes that we can take a novel approach. So there's the concept of a G&T managing these types of commitments and the power delivery on behalf of a number of co-ops. So we have that structure around the country. One of the things we can dig into is, because the data center impact will come to specific geographies, right? That may be in one cooperative under that G&T and affect it disproportionately compared to another. There are certain rules that they have right now on the books or policies that state you can only buy 5% of your power elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, that works in a normal, long-term, slower growth economic development plan that they've been operating under for decades. Changes when a hyperscaler comes in and wants 150 per, right? Or if you get 4 of them. So I think having mechanisms that address that specific risk and adapt to it more like an entrepreneur would, rather than a bureaucratic organization, I think that's a huge opportunity for the GNTs that they can proactively take and just update their approach for how they accommodate this risk and work with their member cooperatives to help them address this on an individual basis and become more of a facilitator and a partner to that problem and not behold them to an old system that doesn't match that risk profile. So I think there are things that we can do even before we get to technology, even before we get to capacity, that are just good business decisions that I think if we adopted it very aggressively, that would help solve some of this problem in the short term and provide a bridge to the longer term too.
Great. So before we ask questions of the audience, I have one more question, and starting with you, Alex, talking about the impact of AI and leveraging AI from a operations point of view in the data centers, and your thoughts on that one. So.
Well, I love the presentation that Daniel did. I mean, how amazing was that,
Yeah.
right? ChatGPT and things of that nature, and the languages. How we see AI really improving customer service and the NOC is really improved communication, which is really what Daniel was sharing. And so let me share a story. 20-something years ago, I'm in a vendor meeting. And in that vendor meeting, it's Telepacific. So now you know what timeline this is, right? And during that presentation, the Telepacific rep goes, hey, I want to talk about customer service. And what she does is she picks up the phone and calls their NOC. And she says, I guarantee you they're going to pick up within 30 seconds. Called, picked up right away. That was very powerful. And yes, we signed with them right then and there. When you have a presentation and you have a slide that says customer service, what does that really mean? Mm-hmm. Like how good is it? Would you pick up the phone and call your NOC and see and risk how long it would take? Who's going to pick up the phone? What are they going to say? Are they going to speak English? Will they understand? Like there's a lot of risk there, and I have not seen that type of presentation since, and that was 20-something years ago. Mm. With AI, how that can improve it is really at the NOC level, the tier 1 level. I've been on hold many times. This company, previous companies, I've been on hold for an hour plus. All I really want to know is why my circuit's down. They pick up the phone. They say, oh yeah, your circuit's down. We're going to create a ticket. Okay, I waited an hour for that. Imagine the improved customer service that can happen if we proactively send those tickets, or we're able to really eliminate that high stress, high turnover, position of that tier 1 customer service person, so that we can, via AI, figure out what the issue is, create the ticket automatically, and get it to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and actually have them solve the problems quickly and proactively. It's huge. It's a game changer.
Yeah, agreed. Marcus, any thoughts on AI impacting operations?
Yeah, at the end of the day, what these technologies are designed to do is drive processing output and outcomes, right? And there, Satya Nadella gave a talk not too long ago where he talked about like the scaling laws at work here. There's kind of Metcalfe's law, and he's calling it sort of like 2 times Metcalfe's law. He's calling it a scaling law, which is the processing output and the power that AI is generating right now for data centers and other uses in hardware is doubling like every 6 months. It's going crazy. And the new emerging metric is tokens to watts to dollars. And so this is kind of when I think about, you know, the old effectiveness ratio of data centers being maybe power usage effectiveness or water usage effectiveness ratios, this tokens to watts to dollars concept tells me that chip manufacturers, users, as they look for ROI, are going to be looking to solve these problems of power. And they're going to be looking at these metrics of how can I do this most effectively. And so I think when we think about AI tools, at the end of the day, these are driving towards an ROI. And these are driving towards a market equilibrium, hopefully, where we're seeing greater productivity, much more effective use of power capacity for the right types of projects. And I think we, you know, have to recall that that's what we're ultimately sort of pushing for in this frontier on this like S-curve of innovation.
Great point, great point. Well, we do have a few minutes left for questions from the audience. So here's your opportunity to ask some of the leading industry experts. I see there's one in the corner over there. Of course, I'm making everyone run. If you can stand up, I think we're trying to bring the microphone to you. We can hear you.
So I get, Joni, this is kind of around your comments and questions about cooling. I understand that nearly 50% of the energy costs for a data center go into cooling. I'm wondering if anybody is using things such as geothermal, type of cooling, which is, 2 to 3 times more efficient than air-to-air air conditioning. And especially if you're talking about geothermal in a closed loop system, and data centers actually use liquid cooling, you could actually use that liquid to actually do direct cooling without all the water, usage as well. Just not sure if anybody's actually investigating or using like geothermal, currently for cooling, or if there's a plan for it.
Great question. Want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I mean, not so much geothermal, and just to kind of, Marcus mentioned this, there's a % utility effectiveness, and candidly in Europe, throughout the EU, some countries now are mandating that number, right? So for example, in Germany, it's 20%. So you can use 20% of the energy towards cooling and the ancillary, right? So for every megawatt of load-bearing IT load, you get 200 kilowatts to cool it. Direct-to-chip cooling is helping that. It's actually showing a 10% improvement. And then the other thing that's happening a lot in Europe is they have heat reclamation, right? So the heat that we do pass off the data center, they're coming and picking it up, so to speak, and they have these extensive heat reclamation networks throughout some of the major cities throughout Europe. And that heat is then used to heat homes or other things, right? So it's moving in that direction. Geothermal, I've heard for energy generation, not so much cooling, but the state of the practice as it stands right now is to bring that chilled water directly to the chip through those connections in the box. Immersion is coming, but it's got issues. Candidly, some of the fluids that are being used in some countries in the world is considered hazardous material, and if you've ever seen the demo, it's interesting. But who knows, right? It like everything, it's early days for that too. But specifically geothermal, I haven't seen, but just some other things that are happening around that area that you're bringing up, which is the PUE. Interesting.
Yeah, I think I've read a little bit about geothermal, and one of the questions I would have is just what's the ability for that to be relevant at the local data center level for your capacity today. I think there might be that lead time, right, to figuring out how to bring these new solutions to market. One of the things that's factual about our data center capacity, I mentioned something like 2,700 megawatts in operation today, is there's still a legacy of cloud workloads in there, and there's still sort of a, what used to be 5 kilowatts of rack density has grown to maybe 15 on average, but we can see the inflection points already happening where the densities are going to increase significantly. So we're exploring, the hybrid of air and liquid cooling in our environments. We're exploring the basis of design for our data centers. And as we think about those next 3-year projects, the basis of design for our data centers, we absolutely have to be thinking about alternative energy sources and effective energy sources.
Great. I think we had another question. All right.
So one of the things I'm hearing in the news is, as you folks are going to rural communities to seek out cheaper real estate and power, some of the rural communities are pushing back, right? They're saying, I don't want this big, huge data center humming 24/7 in my backyard. What are you doing to kind of address those concerns?
Yeah, it is a concern. I think first and foremost, I'll call it proper, intelligent land choice, and not overplaying intelligent, but it's kind of one of those things where if you're butting up next to a residential community, it's probably going to cause you difficulties. So if you're going for purposes of being in the expanse of, land, then go there is what I would say. Because again, I live in Ashburn, and I don't, there's a lot of things wrong with Ashburn from a data center perspective, but it's just like the sheep, they just keep following right off the cliff, and it just keeps getting bigger, and they're going to overstay their welcome. But no, it's real. It's a real issue. Mm-hmm. It starts with some community outreach, and again, I think just being a little bit more thoughtful and intelligent about where you go. I don't know.
Yeah, there's actually a new group that's formed as of a couple of years ago that's specializing in literally banking land for data centers, and they're looking at markets where they can accelerate what they call responsible infrastructure. So they're thinking about permitting, fiber capacity, land choice, residents, and those types of things. That's an emerging business model that's just kind of come out of the last 18 months. And I think it's indicative of the point that, as data centers grow, these questions are far more relevant than maybe they were just 5 years ago. As I think about Digital Realty specifically, we tend to operate in markets like Northern Virginia, but to the point of Northern Virginia, many years ago, we bought expansion capacity next to the airport, right? We didn't want that to be as much in the community right next to residences and multi-dwelling units. We want it to be sort of by an airport, right? We think that's actually more friendly for the community if that's where we house the next set of data centers in that market. So these are absolutely the types of questions that we're thinking on.
Yeah. Alex, and then Josh, your thoughts? No?
Yeah. I'm sure most of you have either know of a central office or been by one before. There's no geothermal anything going on there. I mean, if the community's asking for anything, they're just like, can you put a pane on that building? But that's about it.
Well, great. Well, I think we actually ran over a little bit, but I appreciate the questions from the audience. Of course, during lunch and during the demos, grab us for additional questions. And I want to thank our panelists for spending the time with us. And it was very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.